Good morning, boys and girls, and welcome back to our online Sunday school. I hope that you're all doing well. We are praying for you, and hopefully it won't be long before we get to see you. Now, today our lesson is found in the book of Exodus, chapter 7 to chapter 10. Now, last week we saw how God had spoken to Moses through a burning bush, and he was going to go back to Egypt, and through the power of God, he was going to let God's people out of Egypt. Now Moses returned to Egypt after 40 years, and he was ready to lead God's people with his power, with God's power out of Egypt. Now Moses and Aaron, they went to tell Pharaoh and said that the Lord God, I am, said that he needs to let the Israelites go. Pharaoh wasn't happy about this. He said, well, who is this God I am that I should listen to? And Pharaoh hardened his heart. He was not happy to be told what to do. In fact, he got the taskmasters to make the Israelite slaves work even harder. Now the Israelites were so unhappy, and they moaned and they complained to Moses. And they said, look what you've done, Moses. We're having to work even harder. And they were so unhappy. And Moses was very sad at this. And he spoke to God. And God said, I want you to go back to Pharaoh. And I want you to tell Pharaoh that he needs to let my people go. And there we see Moses and Aaron. They went again to Pharaoh and said, the Lord God has said that you need to let his people go. And Pharaoh really hardened his heart, and he wasn't happy with this. And he even said, well, show me some miracle or sign of who this God is. And we see that Aaron took his rod and he threw it on the ground and it became a snake. Well, Pharaoh said, well, I've got some magicians that can do that. And he brought in his magicians, and they did the same. But the wonderful thing is that God's miracle, he made Aaron's snake swallow up the two magician snakes. And they were so surprised. They thought, wow, that was quite something. But we see Pharaoh was still hard, and he just didn't want God's people to go. Well, Moses and Aaron spake to God, and they were very upset and very saddened for God's people, and said to God, well, what are we going to do? And we're going to see that God tells Aaron and Moses to go and speak to Pharaoh. And if he does not let his people go, that God was going to send plagues upon Egypt. So Moses went and spake to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh still would not let God's people go. So then we see God sent 10 plagues, and we're going to go through some of these plagues. So the first plague or punishment that God sent on Egypt was with the water. We're going to see Aaron lifted his rod on the river, and the water turned to blood. And that was awful because they couldn't drink water, they couldn't cook. The animals died, and even the fish, and the water started to stink. And Pharaoh was really upset about this. And we're going to see how he calls for Moses and Aaron. And he says, okay, please, can you just, I'll let the people go. Just go to your God and take this away. We can't cope with this, the blood in the water and not being able to drink. And so Moses and Aaron go back to God. And they say, Pharaoh said that he will let the people go. But when the water went back to normal, Pharaoh hardened his heart. And you know what? He didn't let the people go. So Moses went back to Pharaoh and said, God said that you need to let the people go. And if you don't, he will send another plague, which he did. Well, we see that the next plague that he sent was frogs. I don't know how many of you, I can't stand frogs. I really don't like frogs. And the frogs were everywhere. They were in the food, they were in the bed, and there we have the frogs. And Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, okay, he said, just go to your God and get rid of these. You know that even the magicians, they said this is the finger of God with these plagues, because they couldn't even get rid of these frogs. So Moses and Aaron went back to God, and they said, Pharaoh said he will let the people go. If we take away the frogs, he'll let the people go. Well, Pharaoh lied, because Pharaoh hardened his heart again, and he wouldn't let the people go. So we see the third plague that God sent. And this is awful, because sometimes, I'm not sure if you've had it in your school, where they had lice. And the lice was everywhere, in their eyes, in their hair, the animals, everywhere. It was buzzing around them. And it was awful. It was in the food. And Pharaoh, he called for Moses and Aaron. He said, okay, I'll let the people go if you just get rid of this lice. And Moses and Aaron went before God and said, Pharaoh said he will let the people go if you stop the lice. Well, God took away the lice. What do you think Pharaoh did? Well, Pharaoh hardened his heart, and he still didn't let God's people go free. Well, then we see God sent another plague. And this time it was flies. I'm not sure if you like flies, but I don't. They're just so annoying, and they come flying by your food and flying in your face. Well, these flies were everywhere. They were in the food, and they were in people's faces. And the king just couldn't cope. He just said, okay, Moses and Aaron, just go to your God and just get rid of these flies. We can't take it anymore. I'll let the people go free. Wow. We know that that Pharaoh didn't tell the truth. He wasn't going to let the people go free. So then Moses and Aaron spake to God, and God took the flies away. But Pharaoh hardened his heart again, and God sent another plague. Well, this plague was quite an awful plague, because we're going to see that God let the Egyptians' animals die. So their cattle, so it was their cows and the goats and the sheep, they died. And we can see Pharaoh was so upset, and he called Moses and he called Aaron, and he said, please go to your God and, stop this, and I'll let your people go free. And we see that Moses and Aaron went before God, and they said, Pharaoh said that he will let the people go free. And God stopped the animals from dying. Well, it didn't take Pharaoh long before he hardened his heart, and he never let the people go free. How awful. You'd think he would just let those people go free. Well, then God sent another plague. And this time, it was boils, okay? Those like sores all over the people's bodies. Even the king, even Pharaoh had these boils all over their body. And a boil is so painful. Just to have one boil can be painful. But could you imagine if your whole body was full of these sores? And Pharaoh cried out, and he called Moses and he called Aaron, and he said, okay, just get rid of these boils. Go to your God. I'll let the people go free tomorrow. Please stop this. Moses and Pharaoh went before God and said that Pharaoh would let the people go free. Well, boys and girls, it's so sad, because we just know Pharaoh, he just got hard again. When God took the boils away and everything was back to normal, Pharaoh's heart got hard again. He said, no, I'm not going to let God's people go free. So Moses and Aaron went before God, and God sent another plague upon Egypt. And this time, he sent a hailstorm. Now, hail can cause a lot of damage. In fact, if you're outside in a hailstorm, it's quite dangerous, because if the hailstones are quite big, you can get hurt. It was so bad with the storm that it actually killed the people that were outside in the field, and the animals, and the plants, and everything with the hailstorm. It caused such big damage. And Pharaoh was so upset. Again, he called for Moses and Aaron. He said, okay, will you just ask your God to stop these the hailstorm, and I'll let the people go. And Pharaoh, he just would not stop and just obey God. We see he hardened his heart. Moses and Aaron went before God and said to God that Pharaoh was going to let the people go. So God stopped the hailstorm. But what did Pharaoh do? Pharaoh didn't let the people go. He again hardened his heart. And then God sent another plague. Now these are locusts. Now locusts can cause a lot of damage. If you've got any vegetation or any fruit or any greenery, they'll just eat it all up and they can cause a lot of damage. And Egypt had a lot of greenery and food, so these locusts had eaten everything, so that was going to affect their crops and their food. And again, Pharaoh, he called for Moses and he called for Aaron. Look at him there, and he says, oh, please go to your God and just stop this. I'll let the people go. So Moses and Aaron went to God and Pharaoh said he'll let the people go tomorrow. Well, boys and girls, we know Pharaoh again hardened his heart. And God took away the locusts and he should have let the people go free, but he didn't. Pharaoh again hardened his heart towards God. And then Moses and Aaron went back to God and said, God, Pharaoh still won't let your people go. Well, God sent another plague. And this time it was darkness. He brought darkness upon Egypt. It was so dark that the people could not even see each other. They couldn't see where they were going or walking. It was so very dark. And again, we see Pharaoh calls for Moses and for Aaron and says, okay, you know what, I've had enough now. Can you please go to your God and just take this away and I'll let your people go free. So Moses and Aaron go before God and said that, you know what, I think Pharaoh is going to let God's people go free. But you know what, as soon as God brought the light back, Pharaoh again hardened his heart and he never let God's people go free. Now all this time, where the Egyptians were facing all those plagues, the Israelite God's people were untouched. They never experienced those plagues. Now next week we're going to learn about one more plague, and hopefully Pharaoh will soften his heart. Now we need to believe that God is the one and only true God that needs to be worshipped and obeyed. And that's what Pharaoh needed to do. He needed to soften his heart and listen to the one and only true God. So today we've learnt about these 9 plagues that through the power of God he sends upon the Egyptians to show that he is God. And I do believe that Pharaoh did realize that this is a powerful God, but still his heart was still hard against God. Now, boys and girls, I hope that you don't have a heart like Pharaoh, where your heart is hard against God. It is so important for us to believe in the one and true God. Now today, our verse that we have is found in Psalms 147 verse 5, and it says, "Great is our God and of great power." So we today do serve a great God with great power. And next week, we're going to see how God does answer the prayer of the Israelites. And we'll learn about the next plague that God sends. And hopefully, Pharaoh softens his heart and he obeys God. Thank you so much for listening, and I trust God will bless you. Thank you. Bye.